So Oppenheimer is a historical biopic from large-scale filmmaker Christopher Nolan. It's his first film with Universal, following a split from Warner Brothers, his storied studio of 20 years, under which he produced The Dark Knight, Prestige, Interstellar, Inception, Tenet, his last one, and now he is back with Oppenheimer, the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the American scientist that created the atomic bomb that was swiftly dropped on Japan in a horrifying act of war. Two of them, actually. It was a whole thing. The movie doesn't focus so much on that, fortunately, more on the building of the bomb, right? And J. Robert Oppenheimer, who's a young, up-and-coming scientist who sees the world differently and wants to explore what's possible in space and time. But suddenly, of course, about halfway through his career, America enters the war. Hitler declares war on the world. World War II kicks off. And right when I think the atom is split, Oppenheimer realizes that every great physicist would have the ability to create a large-scale explosion, a bomb, if you will. And suddenly, countries begin scrambling to grab up scientists as fast as they can to be the first to create the weapon that will end the war upon their enemies. It is a wild 3-hour biopic. Chunks of it are in black and white. There's incredible footage of explosions, space-time, all of which is claimed to be made without CGI. Obviously, still a little visual effects, I think. But anti-CGI Chris Nolan has done something rather stunning here. Film stars Cillian Murphy as the titular Oppenheimer. The movie is Oppenheimer. Andy, what'd you think?
Like we were saying, what a weekend at the movies. And Oppenheimer couldn't be any different from Barbie. It's a 3-hour biographical epic. Largely, it's kind of a political, historical drama more than anything. It's less about the bomb and more about an actual biopic of Oppenheimer, which was a little surprising because the trailer really plays up the bomb development and that's definitely a big part, but it's much more about the person of J. Robert Oppenheimer and how he kind of fits in or kind of doesn't fit in to he's a brilliant man, but he doesn't play the politics game very well. He's a bit of a womanizer and does these things at places he works. He also just doesn't understand the politics at large, what it means to develop the bomb. What is it going to mean when America when you're the only one, or when you're one of a few people in the world. It's a lot of people talking in rooms, but as well as just really good pacing. It's 3 hours long, but it doesn't feel like 3 hours. There's hints of Terrence Malick. Especially in the beginning, Terrence Malick, of course, if you've seen something like The Tree of Life that juxtaposes all these images of the creation of the universe, we get a little bit of that as we see Oppenheimer kind of thinking and formulating scientific thoughts in his mind. A huge cast, a lot going on in this film, so much to talk about.
I think we should probably start with our cast, and then I do want to talk about kind of the life and times of J. Robert Oppenheimer, because of course he is our focus. The film is headed by Cillian Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer, an old Nolan favorite, right? He's been in a handful of Nolan films, and Nolan has wanted to use him as a protagonist for a long time. He tested for Batman. There's a screen test you can find on YouTube of him testing for Batman Begins for settling on Scarecrow. Nolan always said he loved his piercing blue eyes. That was the thing. He loved that Cillian Murphy just has these like strikingly ice blue eyes, which is true, and are very much featured here. And when Nolan got this book, American Prometheus, which is what this movie is based on, he got that from Rob Pattinson. Rob Pattinson gave it to him. So he said, I think on the set of Tenet, he was like, hey, I've been reading this book. I think you might like it. And he gave it to him, and Nolan loved it. And he was like, oh my God, this is something brilliant. It's surprising because Robert Pattinson isn't in this movie. You'd think he would have shown up somewhere in there. Yeah. Maybe when he went off to do Batman, Nolan was sour grapes. Probably not. I think they're fine. But anyway, Nolan said in an interview that he saw on his desk the cover of American Prometheus, like from far away. And he thought, by God, that's Cillian Murphy. That's him right there. Film also stars Emily Blunt, a whole host. Matt Damon, Robert Downey Jr., Alden Ehrenreich, Jason Clarke, Tony Goldwyn, Kenneth Branagh, just to name a few. There's a bunch others in here. I almost don't want to give them away because Much like a Wes Anderson film, the cast is so charming, and so many of them are just used for like a couple scenes, and then you don't see them again. And it makes for like a great carousel of interesting characters to swim in and out of your movie, like that keeps our 3 hour plot line moving very effectively. Even through its kind of back and forth time shift sequences, which I think we can talk about without giving away too much.
Yeah, the movie juxtaposes Oppenheimer's very early life in science to also getting recruited to develop the bomb with scenes that take place about 10, 15 years later, where he's being interrogated about his security clearance and how that relates to members of Congress in very different periods. And you have this juxtaposition of, he was this great figure in the American war effort, and then 10 years later, he's persona non grata. And you also just have this background of kind of Red Scare going on. This was very anti-communist time when McCarthyism started to kind of develop. So you have that going on in the background. And this is, again, when Oppenheimer's not good at playing the politics of it. He's very open-minded. He associates with left-wing and communist groups, and people are like, stop doing that, stop hanging out, stop talking about unionizing in the teachers lounge. And he doesn't. He does what he wants to do, what he thinks is right in the moment. So we have these political issues kind of going on in the background as well. And there's like one of the big issues is the secrecy of it all. And Matt Damon's trying to keep people separate. He's trying to keep the secrecy. Like, this group of people doesn't talk to this group of people. And Oppenheimer's like, they got to talk or we're not going to get it done. And he just does it. So there's a lot of layers going on.
Yeah, I was really interested in the kind of back and forth. People have compared it to like The Social Network, the way that movie features like Mark Zuckerberg and friends building Facebook, and then cuts between that and like the trial where they're like reviewing evidence of who's suing who for Facebook's creation, and you get your characters kind of bouncing between early and later. Similar kind of setup here, a bit more exciting, of course. But J. Robert Oppenheimer is really uniquely positioned in this movie. It would have been easy, I think, to frame him as a hero, because that's what America wants to see him as, right? Like, once he develops this device, people love the guy. Oh my God, they have a rally and he comes out, the man that moved the earth, right? He's the man. But meanwhile, there's questions of security and cloak and dagger, right? Like, functionally, the creation of the bomb is what pushed us into the Cold War, right? Like, which was a time of secrets and secrecy and spies and information and coded messages. Like, all of that plays in here. And Oppenheimer not only pushes the boundaries of what's acceptable as far as security goes in the sake of best interest for the country, I think, in his own career, but he also pushes the boundaries of his personal life. He has a number of relationships that aren't exactly ethical. I'm going to use that term, and you can watch the movie yourself and find out what I mean. That stress his kind of character and his judgment, and end up coming back to haunt him in these trial proceedings when he's being pushed into a role he doesn't really want to be in. That stuff all plays into what we're watching, and it creates like a pretty interesting, multifaceted look at a character, while also keeping him at arm's length due to just the number of people in the cast. There's so many people here, and it does make for admittedly, a lot of people in rooms talking, and I think you either like that or you don't. And for an IMAX screen, it's not a bad time, but I think maybe not what people expected due to a trailer that looks like a lot of landscapes and sweeping shots and bombs going off, right? What do you think, Andy?
It's the cinematography is just incredible in so many ways. The way, again, this is 3 hours long of a lot of people talking in rooms, and it still manages to be very exciting visually. Like, the pace is just go, go, go. You don't have like these long, slow moments like a lot of movies would do. I was actually reminded strangely of John Wick, that fills a 3 hour runtime by just being go, go, go the whole time. But we just have incredible ways of laying out the different interviews and different time periods. Part of the movie's in black and white, part of it's in color, part of it switches. We have ratio changes. If you see it in IMAX, you'll see the full screen filled, but it changes. It's not filled the entire time. That would be kind of almost a lazy thing to do, but Nolan is very particular and when he uses the entire screen, and then when he cuts it down into different sizes.
It's funny. Nolan, I was actually watching an interview with Matt Damon earlier. He and Cillian Murphy have explained in the interviews for this something really interesting about the way Nolan makes movies, something I didn't know. At least now. Maybe he used to be this way. But on Oppenheimer, he doesn't use what's called a video village, which is where on a lot of movie sets you'll see like a tent or a tarp or something with like a dozen seats around it, and you'll see a bunch of monitors where the actors and the director and crew and producer can all go in and watch takes right after they happen. So you can do a couple good takes and you go to the video village and watch it back, see how it looks. Okay, we need to do this again, we need to get that again, continuity's off, whatever. Nolan did not do this for this film. That's what they said. These two lead actors. They said what he does is he goes out on set, he's got his cameraman looking through the lens, and he's right next to the cameraman. And they film it, and he's right there next to the camera. And he said when they get the take they're looking for, he looks at the cameraman who's looking down the lens looks at him to confirm they got it, and that's it. You move on. And it leaves your actors this space to breathe a little, because they're not stressing about, I have to get this exactly right, or I have to hit this note perfect. Like as soon as they get it, boom, got it. Next scene. It's like practically a guerrilla tactic nowadays. And Nolan makes it look so effortless because this film just looks great. There's so much great looking stuff here. And whether they're juggling like giant loud IMAX cameras or something a bit more sincere, like they managed to create a really fantastic presentation. And presentation it was when we saw it, of course, in 70 millimeter IMAX. We got to talk about the experience, Andy. I was so excited when we booked this theater. We booked those tickets 2 months in advance to see it at one of 19 theaters in the United States that is showing the film in 70 millimeter film IMAX. It is wild. Giant print of the film. It's 600 pounds and 11 miles long. A Cinemark where we watched it had to have a projectionist on staff all day just to make sure it didn't break, like just to sit there and watch the IMAX print to make sure it didn't freak out. And for our experience, tremendous. Giant sound, big volume, a little bit of a flicker in some of the bright parts, but I want to say, I think as somebody who used to work projection, like I think that stuff's cool. I like that kind of tangible feeling to it. Andy, what'd you think?
It was incredible to be able to see it in its 70 millimeter glory. However, I was a little disappointed because there are just a few scenes that are really amazing, like when you finally see the spoilers explosion coming, and some other scenes early on of like Oppenheimer thinking about how the sun works and stars imploding. But a lot of this film is not in the full IMAX frame. It's not the full 5 stories, and a lot of it is just people talking in rooms. It's interviews going back and forth and discussion and strategy, and it's not what I think about when I think about IMAX. Usually like a big action sequence like he would have had in the Batman movies or in Inception or other things like that. So it was great to see it in IMAX, but I feel like this is blasphemous. It's not like a must see in IMAX.
Yeah, I kind of feel the same way because we were just briefly talking about it earlier. Like, I agree you don't have to see it in IMAX. That being said, I do think if you're going to see it, you should. It's like, what, a couple extra bucks to see it on a premium screen? You should try to see it in that. You definitely don't need to see a 70 millimeter film. Like, those tickets are mostly sold out anyway. But like, I promise, if you're going to see it on an IMAX, you're still seeing it real big. Like, you're not missing too much. But for what it was, I thought it was really special. 2 more quick things I want to touch on. I know this review is running long. Number 1, the horror of the film. There's definitely some weird existential horror going on in Oppenheimer because obviously we, the audience, know well ahead of our characters just what devastation is to be wrought from their actions. And as they kind of find that out and things start to take a darker turn in Oppenheimer, like you get a really, really fascinating introspection into how you feel about the events of World War II and what J. Robert Oppenheimer and his scientist friends were working on out there. And additionally, I wanted to mention the score. Dude, I think the score is so good in this movie. Andy's a bit more middling on it than me. I still think it's incredible. As soon as the movie was over, I leaned over during credits. I was like, score of the year, right? Oscar? Boom, Ludwig Göransson, score of the year. Amazing. Maybe not. I might have gotten ahead of myself, but I do think it's stellar.
The score is very good. Our boy Ludwig Göransson is back. He did the scores he's done the scores for both Black Panther movies as well as Tenet, Christopher Nolan's last film. He's also done the themes for the Mandalorian show. So you definitely know his work, and I'm a big fan. Like I have the Tenet soundtrack on my big soundtrack playlist, as long as with Black Panther 2. I wasn't as in love with this as I've been with some of his other stuff, but it's very inspired by the work of minimalists. And I need to explain this just a little bit because minimalism in music is different from in art or in other. It doesn't mean small or sparse. What it kind of means is repetitive. If you think someone like Philip Glass or Hans Zimmer, that you'll have very repetitive patterns that very slowly morph and change over time. Philip Glass is famous for doing his like and for like minutes on end, and then things will slightly change. And so we get a lot of that. We also have the influence of composers like Steve Reich and that kind of the minimalists of the 60s. So this doesn't sound as much like Ludwig Göransson as I've come to know his work. It's a little bit more restrained, but I think it's because it's not that kind of movie. Like it's not an action movie. It's not Black Panther or Tenet, but it is really, it's part of what helps the pacing moves. The music is moving the entire time.
Yeah, like the music is very consistent throughout the film, and I think that's important. Like it gives it a pace, and it just feels pressing, right? Like that 3 hours goes by real quick, and that's impressive. It's not easy to do. I think Nolan really does have the ability to produce like movie magic. Like I mean, by the time you get to the third act in Prestige, you're convinced a man can teleport, and by the time you get to the third act in this film, like you're convinced like this bomb is the biggest thing that you've ever seen on the screen. Like it's really tremendous, and I think he can do something really special. I think he brings it to the film. Any other thoughts for recommendations?
I'm ready.
Andy, would you recommend Oppenheimer?
Absolutely. One of the best films of the year, one of the best films I've seen ever. Very different from, again, something like Barbie, but it's been amazing. The groundswell and the buzz for this movie. Again, it's a 3-hour political historical film that somehow keeps really good pace, and you're going to learn a lot, and has a lot of themes about it. Like you said, existentialism, Red Scare, that kind of free thinking. There's a couple of great scenes where Oppenheimer imagines that they might light the entire atmosphere on fire. Like things like that are really amazing. Incredible score, incredible cast. Highly recommend.
Same. I think Oppenheimer's super good, and you should totally see it. I think if you're interested, you should go see it in a theater while you still can. It'll be on streaming, and considering it's Universal, it's almost guaranteed to go to Peacock, which I don't know if any of you have, but if you want to watch it there when it comes out, you can. Of course, it'll be PVOD as well, but if you have the ability, I think you should go see it in theater. And if you're going to a theater, I also think you should spend a couple more bucks and get a premium screen, in my opinion, at least because you can't do it for Barbie, which is criminal. Stunning week at the movies. Probably 2 top 10s, right, in one weekend, Andy, I feel.
Yeah.
I feel
absolutely.
pretty confidently saying, yeah, like it's just insane.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't believe it, because I thought Oppenheimer would maybe suffer because of the success of Barbie, but like I said, they've both done very well.
Yeah, both overperforming, wild stuff. Andy, what are we watching next week?
Next week we are taking a break because it's been a big weekend at the movies. Also, not a lot coming out, but we are going to be, next time we do the show, we're going to be looking at Talk to Me, which is the new horror feature from A24 that comes out this Friday, July 28th, in theaters only. And then the following week, we're going to be watching Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, the new animated film that comes out only in theaters on August 4th. And for anyone interested, this week, this Friday, Disney's Haunted Mansion is coming out in theaters as well, if you have interest for that.